There we go. We are now live with Condo Q's. My name is Ryan Stenquist here again, and my co-host.
I'm Sandy Wagner here again, and I'm currently the president of the Vancouver Island Strata Owners Association. And tonight we're going to talk about enforcing strata bylaws.
Absolutely. So everybody's favorite subject. I'm sure all you council members out there that are watching. There's no funner task than dealing with bylaw enforcement.
Yeah, it's the one task that every council member hates to do, because
Yes.
you don't like to be harsh against your neighbors. They're your neighbors. You have to live with them. So every council member really avoids bylaw enforcement, but it's your job.
Yeah, nobody wants to be the bad guy, but of course that's a requirement of the Strata Council under the Act. And the other part of this is it's stressful. You can get into a lot of conflict through bylaw enforcement. And it can be prolonged. It's something that can seem like a little issue on the surface can really get in there and fester and boil and turn into a bigger issue down the road if it's not dealt with properly right up front.
Exactly, yeah. So there's so many things that can go wrong with bylaw enforcement, but the most important thing for us is to tell you how to do it right.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Section 135 of the Strata Property Act tells you the steps to follow when you're doing bylaw enforcement. So first you have to have a complaint. Council member can make that complaint themselves if it's something they're walking by every day. They don't have to wait for an owner to write a complaint, but complaints in writing are always a good idea.
Absolutely.
So the person who's alleged to have broken the bylaw needs to be given notice of the infraction. They need to be given the details, like it was alleged that you broke bylaw 6.3 on a certain day at a certain time. They have to be given the right to answer that complaint. You know, council will make our decision at the next council meeting if we don't hear back from you. You're invited to come to a council meeting and give your side of the story.
Yeah.
And then at the next council meeting, the council can make their decision. If they've heard from the owner, they take the owner's feedback into account. If they haven't heard from the owner, they make their decision.
Yeah. One interesting point about the notice period is like a lot of things under the Act, it's somewhat of a gray area. It's not written in black and white, but basically the Act reads they must be given reasonable opportunity to respond.
Yes.
Well, reasonable opportunity isn't strictly defined under the Act, but based on case law and that sort of thing. Basically, the 2 weeks is the accepted rule of thumb.
Exactly, yeah. And if they request a Strata Council hearing, you have to hold that hearing within 4 weeks. So you've got a few timelines to follow there when you're trying to do some bylaw enforcement. It's difficult to write those letters though, so you can get some sample template letters to help you write those bylaw complaint letters through the Civil Resolution Tribunal's website. You can also get them through VIZOA. We've got copies of them that we give out in some of our workshops, and you could email us and we'll gladly send them out. They really help because it's really tricky to write those letters. The sample templates that are available have all the pertinent information in there.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great resource because there is certain things that are required to be noted in those letters, like what the alleged perpetrators' opportunities to respond are, what their rights are under the Act. All those things need to be included in that letter. So we see decisions on a regular basis where strata corporations cannot enforce their bylaws simply because they're not following the proper procedure as far as letters and notice periods and that sort of stuff.
Exactly, that's huge. Just to get prepared for tonight, I went to the Civil Resolution Tribunal website and I searched the completed decisions, and you can do that yourself. I just searched for 135, which is the section of the Strata Property Act that talks about bylaw enforcement, and there's over 125 decisions that reference that section of the Act. So you can just pick through them randomly and read and see how the decisions went. I picked 10, and of those 10, 8 of them, the Strata Council actually got it wrong in their bylaw enforcement, and I found 2 where the Strata Council got it correct.
So let me use my powerful math brain. So we're talking about an 80% failure rate based on our small sampling.
Based on that small sampling.
An 80% failure rate as far as they didn't get their fines because they didn't follow the proper procedure.
Exactly, yeah, and it's not difficult to follow the correct procedure if you have some tools, and so that's why I really like the template letters that are available.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
no, that's a great resource.
So what's going to happen if you have a dispute with an owner? You're not going to be able to collect those fines ultimately if you've not followed the Strata Property Act. But even stepping back a bit from fines, the most important goal of bylaw enforcement is not to collect the money. the most important goal is to change the behavior.
Absolutely.
That's against your bylaws.
Yeah, and that's actually, I'm glad you brought up that point. That's something that I used to say to my council members on a regular basis when I was managing strata corporations: is don't look at fines as a punitive measure. Look at it as something to deter people up front.
Yeah.
So you don't have to get in that position in the first place.
Yeah.
Which talking about that, so you mentioned hearings earlier, and I think this is an important topic to talk about, is how to deal with hearings. If an owner or a tenant gets a bylaw violation and requests a hearing, how should the council deal with that? What's your best advice?
It's a big topic, but in 50 words or less. So the most important thing is that it's a closed portion of your Strata Council meeting. You don't invite, you don't allow other observers at the portion of your Strata Council meeting where you're having a hearing about a bylaw infraction. And it's not meant to be an inquisition of the owner. You simply state, these are the facts that have been alleged to us, or these are the matters that have been alleged to us. Do you have anything to say in response? And the owner's response could be as simple as, well, I was out of the country that day. It couldn't have been me making the noise. So you might have a bit of back and forth with some questions, but really it's a chance for the owner to present their side of the story, the council to ask a few questions to clarify any points. And then they say, well, thank you very much for attending the meeting, Mr. Jones. We'll excuse you now, and we'll make our decision, and we'll give you our decision in writing within 7 days.
Absolutely.
And that's when you do it. You don't make the decision in front of the owner.
No, and that's something that I would like to reinforce as well. Is, from my experience, what I found worked best with hearings is, well, the key word is hearing. Yeah. And I find in a lot of cases, you can go a long way towards diffusing the situation just by giving an owner time to say their side of the story. Yeah. But that being said, of course, council meetings are typically very busy. We all struggle to keep them below that 2-hour kind of time limit that everybody seems to focus on. So you don't want an owner in there for half an hour, 45 minutes talking back and forth. So one of the things that I always recommended is have an established procedure. Hold it at the beginning of the meeting before the council meeting, before you get into the other business. And have a very rigid structure.
And say, we've got 15 minutes for you.
5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on what the problem is. But 5 minutes might seem like a very short amount of time, but if somebody's presentation or their side of the story takes more than 5 minutes, well, that's getting quite long. I mean, just talking for 5 minutes, we've just passed 7 minutes right now. So 5 minutes is a very long period of time, but you go give them 5 minutes on the floor, 10 minutes overall. Allow the council members to ask questions, but don't get into discussion about the topic.
Yeah,
ask
exactly.
questions,
just clarifying
save the
questions.
discussion for when the owner is out of the room and council is making their decision.
Exactly.
That's my biggest piece of advice. But again, make sure that the owner the council allows the owner to be heard and they have a voice.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole definition of a hearing is to hear.
Absolutely.
That's very important. We've got lots of people joining us today. Awesome.
Good.
Yeah. So it's really important when you're doing those bylaw enforcement steps to follow them in order as well. You can't say, come to the Strata Council, we want to have a hearing with you. No, you have to first give them notice that there's been an alleged complaint.
Yes.
Now, one thing that happens is quite often an owner will say, well, who made the complaint about me? So what do we do then, Ryan?
Well, that's an interesting one. So going back to my years in Strata previously, most management companies and most Strata councils, I think, always took the stance that those complaints were private information and they couldn't be given under PIPA.
That's what we thought.
or they'd be redacted. You could give somebody the complaint, but you would redact the person's name, their unit number, all identifying kind of information. In 2015, the Office for the Privacy Commissioner came out with a guide, which is a very useful guide. It's on their website. It's, I think, oipc.bc.ca.
Probably, yes.
But it comes out, they came out with a guide specifically for Strata corporations and Strata management companies. And basically what they say in there is that personal information or identifying information shouldn't be contained in any bylaw violation letters. However, if somebody requests that under Section 35 and 36 of the Act, that is correspondence of the Strata Corporation, and Stratas have to provide that unredacted.
Unredacted is the key thing.
And one thing that I was thinking about today, which you didn't deal with specifically, and I'm curious about, is what happens if that bylaw complaint actually does contain personal information, such as a phone number or personal email address?
Well, the Strata Corporation needs to make it clear to owners writing complaint letters that correspondence can be shared with other owners. So to not include your personal information in any correspondence to the Strata Council.
Absolutely. Yeah. So essentially, if you're making complaints about your neighbor or somebody in your building, it's possible, I wouldn't say at this point it's very common this happens, but it is possible that your complaint, what you say, could actually end up in your neighbor's hands.
Exactly, exactly. So many stratas will ask for all letters to be sent as an email attachment. That way the document itself becomes the correspondence and not the email. Mm-hmm. Because if the email is the official correspondence, then your email address is going to be could be shared with all your neighbors. Yeah. So it's a good way to get around that. Interesting one. Yeah. Well, I mean, on the other side of things, just to play devil's advocate, mm-hmm. that could also potentially cut down on frivolous complaints, because that also can happen in stratas as well. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I've never heard of a frivolous complaint. Have you? No, never. Yeah. Hopefully none of us have. Nobody listening has been the target of a frivolous complaint, but man, it can be a problem. And so the council member's job is to take that complaint and do a little investigation. You don't just take the person's word for it. You want to get the other person's side of the story, and you may have to do a little independent investigation as well to see if that complaint is founded. Now, absolutely. Suppose you go through you have a hearing, you listen to the other person's side of the story, you do a little investigation, and you decide that the person has not breached the bylaw. You're not under any obligation to inform the person who complained. You just inform the person the complaint was about. The council's decision is we've concluded. We've concluded there's been no bylaw breach. Yeah, no, and that's a good point, because a lot of people, a lot of owners that I've dealt with in the past expect some kind of direct response to them when they've sent in a complaint, whereas that's not the case. The Strata Council doesn't have to respond to them directly. It's not a bad course of action to do so, but ultimately the decisions of council are going to be in the minutes. So if the owner wants to know the outcome of that complaint, then they should be reading their minutes. Read their minutes, exactly. Yeah. Now, if the council does decide after a hearing that a bylaw has been breached, then it's a matter of how are we going to enforce this bylaw. And it depends on the wording of your bylaws, but most of our bylaws say the strata may fine up to $200. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say the strata will fine $200. Yes. So you want to suit the punishment to fit the crime. So you might want to give somebody a $10 fine if it's a very small infraction. You might want to give a $50 fine, or you might say our punishment to you, we've indicated you have breached this bylaw. We won't be taking any action at this time, but we have indicated that we concluded you breached this bylaw. Yep. You don't have to do something to enforce a bylaw, unless the bylaws state otherwise. There is some bylaws out there, probably not as common anymore, I don't think, as they used to be. You see it a lot more in older buildings where they actually structure the bylaws, i.e. first complaint will be a warning, second complaint will be a $10 fine, third complaint, so on and so forth. Escalating fine. So I hope that's not in your bylaws. Yeah. But if it is, you have to follow it. Yes, you do, which that's another thing where the CRT could take a look at that and say, well, you guys fined $200, but your bylaws say that you have to fine $25 on a first offense. Yeah, exactly. So that's something that might get overturned, and they might get bumped down to a $25 fine instead of a $200 fine. And it's always a good idea to just give a written warning anyway. Absolutely. I mean, like I said, the whole idea of bylaw enforcement is to change the person's behavior. Well, and it's never, in my experience, it's never been a bad thing to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. I think most people inherently, maybe that's just the optimist in me, but most people inherently are good and want to follow the rules. And you know what? Bylaws can be complicated, and or you forget what's going on, and sometimes you just slip up, right? Yeah, exactly. We've all got a big long list of bylaws, and then we forget the standard bylaws apply as well. So it's easy to forget them. Been there, done that. Yeah. So as far as enforcement goes, there's maximum fine amounts under the Act. Yeah. There's maximum fine amounts under the standard schedule of bylaws, which could be amended. And there's also maximum fine amounts for special things like rentals, and the big one is short-term rentals. Short-term rentals, exactly. So the standard bylaws put a maximum fine of $50, but you can amend those up to the maximum under the regulations that allow a fine of up to $200, with the exception of rental restriction bylaw fines are $500 per infraction. Yep. And short-term rental violations are $1,000 a day, or could be up to $1,000 a day if the Stratas amended their bylaws to take that in. Yeah, and typically under the standard schedule of bylaws, a bylaw infraction is basically on a weekly basis is what it can be repeated on every 7 days. So like a rental, a noise bylaw violation, that sort of thing can be refined every 7 days if it's a continuing contravention. If it's a continuing contravention. we need to really make sure that it is something that's continuous.
Yeah.
If somebody's noisy 23 hours a day and then they're quiet for a day, that's not a continuing contravention. That's a separate contravention.
Yes, and then it would be different letters. You have to follow the procedure all over again. Yes, you do have to do it every single time.
Every single time.
So not that I'm encouraging people to go enforcing bylaws just to get practice, but the more practice you get to it, the better it's going to serve you in the long run.
True enough.
It's one of those situations where you hope you don't have to do it, but it's good to know how to do it when it happens.
Exactly. And if your strata is self-managed, you're going to need these tools to help. If you've got a management company, they've hopefully got some template letters that they're using, and the right letters will be sent out on your behalf.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what happens if an owner doesn't want to pay? Or actually, let's back up a little bit. One thing I want to say, that if you are an owner and you get a bylaw violation letter, you need to respond. Because if you don't respond within that 2-week time frame, essentially your rights have gone away. And I know myself as a council member in the past, and also from managing strata corporations, if you get a bylaw complaint and you don't get a response from the person who the complaint is against, then you only have one side of the story, and almost every single time you're going to find in favor of the person making the complaint, and
because
likely either do a written warning or start the fines. So don't go to Strata Corporation 6 months later or a year later and start complaining that you didn't have a chance to defend yourself.
Yeah, because if they've sent you a letter that says you have a chance to respond, please respond.
Yeah, and actually another
even
point,
if it's like, leave me alone, I didn't do it, at least you responded.
Yes,
something in your own
defense. Anything is better than nothing. And as far as the notice delivery method goes, all the Strata Corporation has to do is mail it, and you're deemed to have received it 3 days later.
Yes.
So
3 or 4 days later, something like that.
So it doesn't require registered mail.
No.
They don't have to prove that it was sent to you. They don't have to prove that you received it. All they have to do is prove that it was sent to you.
Prove it was sent. So, I mean, if it's an owner who lives outside of the main strata complex, most stratas will probably send registered mail to make sure the person gets it, but it's not a requirement. It's deemed to be received 4 days after it was sent. Or they'll slip it under your door. It's deemed to be received 4 days later. Or put it in your hand. That way they know you've got it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what does a strata do if somebody, say 6 months, a year down the road, there's $1,000 worth of fines outstanding? How do they recover those?
Well, they can go to the small claims court, or they can go to the CRT, the Civil Resolution Tribunal. You can't place a lien on someone's strata lot for unpaid fines, but there are certainly other ways to collect.
Yeah.
The reason you can't place a lien is because it's not a debt that's proven to be owed. It's an alleged debt.
Yes. Yeah. And then the other point to that too is there's something that a lot of stratas have dealt with, especially in the last 4 years since this came into effect, 4 or 5 years, is the Limitations Act. So under the new form of the Limitations Act is most debts, you only have 2 years to recover that. So things like strata fees, insurance deductibles, that sort of thing, a strata corporation only has 2 years to recover those. So
2 years to start collections at least.
So they can file a lien, but that doesn't secure their right to that debt. They actually have to start foreclosure action within that 2 year period in order to ensure they get that money back. But with fines, there is no limitation period attached to it at this point. There's some good precedent that have changed the way we're all dealing with our fines. So because it's a disputed debt and not an owed debt, the Limitations Act doesn't apply, and you can continue to try to collect those fines even several years later. And this is something that was very interesting. Sandy and I were talking about that before we actually started the segment today. This is something that's really come up just in the last year and a half. I know when I was still professionally managing strata corporations, we operated under the understanding that you only had 2 years to recover those fines. So I think that's I'm not sure what the original case was that clarified that, but it was a little bit of a shock when I first saw it, but it makes sense.
It does make sense, so what happens if 5 years down the road you haven't bothered to try to collect the fines and somebody's trying to sell their unit? Are you ever going to get your fines back? Well, keeping in mind, even if they never pay you, it's not money you were banking on. So if you never get it, it's really not the end of the world, because the problem's moving if they're moving out.
That's a good way to look at it, actually.
So, you could always erase those fines from their account if there was ever any question. What many stratas will do is on the Form F, the certificate of payment that needs to be provided when a strata lot changes hands, they'll put down that fines are still owing, so they can't provide the certificate of payment to indicate no money's owing because fines are owing. And so that's the last chance of the strata corporation to collect those outstanding fines. It's not a good way to go.
No,
Really
I know. Again, back when the understanding of the Act wasn't quite what we have now, a lot of strata corporations used to rely 100% on the Form F to recover these monies, and that's just not a smart way to go anymore. No,
it's just not.
Because ultimately, if you're wrong or something, if the strata corporation didn't do everything to the T, and that deal ends up collapsing, then there's a potential of liability on the strata corporation for causing that to happen.
And we wouldn't want that.
No.
Strata council members have enough to worry about without that on your plate.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as bylaw violations go, we've got a few people tuned in, but I haven't seen any questions yet. I assume that means everybody's got their template letters in front of them and they're studying it up right now. So you don't have any questions, but what we're going to be talking about our next segment. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I don't think so. I think that's good. Nobody wants me to read them a sample template letter, I can't imagine.
I'll go. So the next segment we're going to do, and I'll talk about this a little bit, is sections and types. I actually emailed Sandy a few days ago, and I said, you know what, we have to do a segment on sections and types. If you're, I know there's quite a few realtors that are watching this and owners, and so anybody that's ever been in a building or dealt with a building that's a section or type building knows how confusing it is. And I can tell you that you're probably not going to have a full understanding of it even after our next segment. No, but at least it'll give you a good starting block, and it's definitely a good opportunity to ask questions because there are a lot of intricacies there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's going to be our next topic, which is what is
26th of March.
26th of March. Yes, 26th of March. So again, 6:30 to 7, and people will have the opportunity to ask questions. And we do have a question now on the letters. Does
Vizoa have template letters they share? So they're not Vizoa template letters. We've got permission to use the ones that are available on the Civil Resolution Tribunal website, but you can just send us an email and we will send a copy out to you. We have them available in our workshops for council members as part of our handout material, but absolutely you can just email us administrator@vizoa.bc.ca and we can send those out to you.
Yeah, actually Sharon too, if you want to even just send a private message to Condo Clear, I can with your email, I can send it that way as well. I'm sure you don't want to post your email address on the comments, but you can PM me with your email address and I'll send you a copy out tomorrow.
Yeah.
So yeah, next topic is going to be some sections and types. And stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. And what's going on with Vizoa? Is there any events coming up or seminars?
We're keeping busy for sure. This weekend coming up, we're having a workshop for Strata Council members about Strata maintenance planning. It's on the 16th at the Comfort Inn here in Victoria. And then 2 weeks later on the 30th, we're having a workshop for Strata treasurers, and that's being held at our downtown offices. So we always keep busy.
Money stuff.
Money stuff, yes. The treasurers think that it's too complicated and we aim to make it simple for them.
Yes, well, it's definitely something that can be complicated. It's good on anybody that goes to it because it's important that you do your diligence, especially when you're handling other people's money. It's one thing to balance your own checkbook. It's another thing when you're responsible for 10, 20, 30, 40 other people's money.
Exactly.
You want to make sure that you're doing it right.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of it. It doesn't have to be complicated.
No. What does it cost for members and non-members to attend the seminar?
For members to attend our workshops, they're full-day workshops. It's a $75 fee for members, $95 for non-members, and if you're an individual member, it's in between there. It's $85.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
And we have our
website.
Exactly. Go on our website and find the link to the workshops.
And also, well, given that you're on Facebook right now, you can also look at the Vizoa Facebook page, and
there's always links to the
events and stuff popping up there as well.
Always links to our events for sure.
Great. Yeah. So as far as from Condo Clear's side of things, we do have another question here. What can be done if council does not enforce strata bylaws? Oh, that's actually a really good question, Kelly. So this is something that comes up fairly often. I actually meant to talk about this tonight And I see this when I'm reviewing documents for buyers and sellers. One thing that comes up fairly often is there'll be, say, a pet restriction bylaw that has a maximum weight of 25 pounds or a maximum height of 12 inches at the shoulders or something along those lines. And I've personally seen this happen in deals that I've dealt with. And I've also seen quite a few different CRT cases that have dealt with this as well. And the first thing that they say, or sometimes the listing realtor will say it, or the sellers will suggest it, is that, okay, well, why don't you get approval from the Strata Corporation to have your dog that's 30 pounds, even though the bylaw says 25 pounds. That's all well and good. However,
until it's not.
However, the Strata Council does not have the power to unilaterally decide when and when not to enforce their bylaws. If that bylaw says 25 pounds,
and your dog is 30,
your dog is 30, they are obligated to enforce that. And there is actually a relatively recent CRT decision where this exact scenario happened. A couple bought a condo with a dog that was about 5 or 10 pounds over the weight limit. They were told by the property manager that it was okay. They bought the unit. 6 months down the road, they started receiving complaints, started receiving fines, ended up going through the CRT. The CRT found in favor of the Strata, and they were ordered to get rid of their dog or sell their unit or take some kind of action so the dog wasn't allowed in the unit anymore.
So rehome that dog is what could ultimately happen.
So yeah, whether or not you get approval from the Strata Corporation, it doesn't matter. It's by the words of the bylaw. The only exception to that is some bylaws will say the dog is a maximum of 25 pounds unless approved by the Strata Corporation. So it gives the Strata Corporation a bit of an out there.
It gives the Strata Council a little bit of wiggle room. You shouldn't have too much wiggle room though, because then that becomes, it becomes dangerous if they say, well, how come he can have a dog and he can have a dog and I can't have a dog? So you really want to make sure that you're following the bylaws strictly and not making exceptions.
And
even if
you
you have that wiggle room,
kind of a criteria around your decision making
process. have a procedure and a policy for how you change.
So in order to answer your question, Kelly, quite honestly, and we're fortunate these days that we have the CRT, because 3 years ago my answer would have been you basically have to take it in the court. But now you can go to the Civil Resolution Tribunal. It's $125 to file. You go through the process with a case manager. They try to facilitate some kind of agreement between the two parties. If they can't come to an agreement, then it heads to an adjudicator and they have power to enforce their decisions.
Exactly, yeah. So either you as the owner who's made the complaint can go to the CRT and say, hey, my Strata Council will not enforce this bylaw, and I've got all this proof that the owners, my neighbor's breaching this bylaw, whether they're smoking in their unit or they're noisy or whatever the complaint is. You absolutely have a place now to go if your Strata Corporation won't enforce the bylaws.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kelly just commented again, the big one is barking dogs.
For sure.
And going to noise complaints in general are probably the most common bylaw complaint and probably the most difficult to deal with because it's subjective.
Yeah, exactly. What's noisy for one person is not noisy for another. I grew up in apartment buildings. My parents owned apartment buildings, so I've got a really high noise toleration level. Some people love dogs. I'm not a dog person, so if somebody's little dog is barking next door to me, I'm going to be upset. But not, no more so than having the TV loud.
Don't tell me you like cats more than dogs.
I'm sorry, I'm a cat person. Can you tell by the hair on my jacket?
So barking dogs can definitely be an issue, depending on the time of the day, depending on what the bylaws say. It's wide open to interpretation, and again, it's subjective. Is it reasonable for a dog to bark every once in a while?
Yeah,
if it's constant,
think so.
I mean that's usually a pretty solid case there. But my advice to you is obviously file your complaint with the Strata Council, see what the response is. They are obligated to investigate it somewhat. Quite oftentimes the council will appoint somebody or somebody will volunteer from the council to come and listen to the problem. So, so they'll give you their email address or their direct phone number, and you can call them when it's happening so that they can come and listen, and they can somewhat be not necessarily an advocate, but they can communicate to the rest of the council that this is an issue. It was barking constantly, and they can go from there.
Exactly. And also remember to be aware of what your bylaws actually say. Check the wording in your bylaws before you do a bylaw complaint about a neighbor, if it's a noise complaint or whatever. Because do your bylaws say keep noise to a minimum after 11 p.m. or do they, if it's very specific, then they need to be you need to be aware of the specifics of your bylaws rather than the very general interfering with another owner's use and enjoyment of their strata lot.
Yes.
So that's the standard one, but a lot of stratas will have something more restrictive.
Perfect, and we're at the 29-minute and 19-second mark. So,
wow.
Again, we've got a couple workshops coming up for strata owners. We've got the maintenance planning workshop and the workshop for treasurers.
Yeah.
So check out the Facebook page or their website. And as far as Condo Clear goes, I rolled out a program about 2 or 3 weeks ago, actually at the last VSOA AGM, which is starting to pick up steam. So I'm going to be starting marketing that more, and that's support for self-managed strata corporations.
Which is really needed. Yeah.
It's a complete gap in the market right now. I come from managing big strata corporations, but if you're of the size where it's not prudent economically to hire a full management contract or a full management company,
but you need a little help.
But you need a little help, and it goes a little bit beyond what VSOA offers, because obviously VSOA is a great resource for self-managed stratas, but you need help with drafting your budget or bylaw complaints, dealing with bylaw complaints and setting up that process. And that's a program that I'm actually offering, or Condo Clear is offering now. And we also have a specific program where you get support from myself, licensed strata manager. You get set up with a website and an online presence for document requests, for form apps and form needs through Strata Press, which is another VSOA member. And you also have access to Ion Accounting, which is a registered CPA to help set up your financials and all that sort of good stuff. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible to be self-managed.
Yeah, because
we're trying to give you all the tools that you need.
Because right now there's such a shortage of strata managers, and that's a whole nother topic.
I'm sure we'll get into that in a future show for sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
So
thanks for tuning in today.
Yes, thank you. So March 26th, and we'll talk about sections and types.
Definitely.
Great.
See you then.
Thank you. You're welcome, Kelly.